The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, published in 1964 by Philip K. Dick. I've got this really nice Panther edition with this extremely cool cover art. And this is a science fiction novel which is set in a world that's undergoing extreme heat changes. And as such, many people are being drafted to be sent off to these colonies on other planets throughout the solar system. We're primarily following a company here called PP Layouts, which manufactures these miniature environments consisting of furniture, landscapes and dwellings that act as a focal point for users of a drug called Candy. And when these users take this drug, Candy, which is derived from this alien moss or algae, I think, they are transported to an illusory world, which is this shared hallucinatory experience. And those miniature sets act as a focal point for them to be transported to this world alongside someone else using the drug with you. In this world, everything is perfect, and you take on almost like an avatar of a person who is young and full of energy, and you get to live out this fantasy in this world. This substance is banned on Earth though, so people that do engage in this behaviour have to do so on Martian colonies or on other worlds. The nature of this company is threatened when a mysterious figure called Palmer Eldritch returns from an expedition to the distant stars, where he's been for many years, and he brings back a substance referred to as Choosy, which is said to have a very similar effect to Candy, but potentially be much more potent, with much bigger implications on time and reality. This is an incredibly weird book that starts out fairly straightforward and then devolves into something that is more of a trippy experience that can be confusing, leading to the reader and also the characters questioning what's real, what's not, and what are the true motivations and nature of this mysterious Palmer Eldritch. I think that PKD here establishes some really interesting concepts and some really distinct characters. I think Palmer Eldritch is particularly great as you are trying to figure out exactly who he is and what he's after. And also, as per PKD tradition, he's folding in these religious themes and elements. I mean, the title alone, The Three Stigmata, which actually has become one of my favourite book titles of all time at this point. And those elements don't necessarily feel as tacked on as in something like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. After I did my review of Do Androids Dream, many people pointed to this book and said that it was their favourite PKD novel. After reading it, I do think that I prefer Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. This one is much less cohesive in my opinion. It's not as accessible, but that doesn't mean that it's not great, because I do think it is. And it's one of those books that I think would really benefit from a reread, particularly to try and dive into the last 100 pages or so where things get extremely out there in terms of that nature of reality that I was talking about. So after reading A Maze of Death a couple of years ago, I was off to a little bit of a rocky start with PKD, but now that I've read Do Androids Dream and The Three Stigmata, I'm excited to read more. Where should I go next with Philip K. Dick? And if you're wondering where I am and what this backdrop is, I am in a hotel room in Turin in northern Italy, about to go on my first ever snowboarding trip, so hopefully I don't fall over too much. But if you're watching this, I am uploading it by the time I'm home, so you know that I'm still alive at least. And then next up, I paired these two up in one of my previous videos, and that video did really well. And I think actually the combination of these two is really appropriate, because Robert Silverberg does cite Philip K. Dick as a massive influence on his work. And so the next book here is Dying Inside by Robert Silverberg, copyright 1972. And I've got this Sedgwick and Jackson cover here, which I do think is quite cool. And this really is the story of an aging telepath named David Selig, who is 41 years old, and he is losing his powers. They are fading away, and he can no longer read minds in the same vivid and reliable way that he's always been to since he was a child. David is really struggling in life when we meet him at the start of the book. He is working at Columbia University, where to scrape by and make money, he is ghostwriting papers for students that come to him in secrecy and ask them to write papers for him in exchange for good grades. And so they pay him to write these papers, and because he has these mind-reading abilities, he can examine the thoughts and feelings of these students in order to write these papers in a style which is believably written by those people, so that the lecturers and the examiners do not get suspicious because he's writing in their voice. Now, I think that Dying Inside is a self-insert for Robert Silverberg in many different ways. I think this one is one that's potentially unconscious, because I think Robert Silverberg himself is extremely good at writing in distinct character voices, which is something that comes through in this book, but is probably most evident in The Book of Skulls, which I think is one of his best books. And so he's writing these exam papers for these students in exchange for money, and he's feeling guilty about having to rely on his sister for handouts and occasional accommodation. And so what we really get here is a jump between the modern timeline where he's ghostwriting these papers, but then he's also reflecting on his life and pondering whether he used these abilities in the best possible way. For someone with the ability to read minds, how is he in this situation where he's living in squalor and relying on such shady activities to make a living? So the book does jump between David's early life as a child, going all the way through into his adulthood and his run-ins with other characters and a couple of love interests. These stream of consciousness style recollections are told in a non-linear fashion, and one minute you'll be with David as he's in college, and then another you'll be with him as he's a child. And I actually think the nature of memory probably works in that way. You're not remembering things in this linear fashion. And so even though that makes the book feel fragmented, I do think it makes sense for what Silverberg is trying to do here. There is this sort of voyeuristic feeling that you get reading this book, not only because David is feeling that when he is reading the minds of the people around him, but also because he's addressing you as the reader directly and calling you out sometimes for wanting to delve into his mind. And really, Robert Silverberg is not holding anything back here. You get the real deep recesses of David's mind, and his darkest and most troubled thoughts and feelings come to the forefront in a way that's really honestly written. There's some dark thoughts in here that occasionally get into some uncomfortable territory, but I've not really encountered anyone in science fiction doing this outside of Robert Silverberg in The Book of Skulls. So this deep, honest reflection on a man's life does go up and over the line sometimes in terms of sexism and homophobia and racism. And actually, I do think that that's not Robert Silverberg coming through in this writing. It's the character of David. Outside of one really unfortunate scene later in the book involving a number of black students that I think was really heavy-handed. But for the most part, it is a balanced look at this troubled man's internal monologue. And again, written in that stream of consciousness style way, that is extremely effective. The other reason I think that this is a self-insert for Robert Silverberg, outside of the main character being Jewish, is that it is this deep reflection on potential and responsibility, and also the fading of these cognitive abilities sliding away into death, which is confronting at times. And Robert Silverberg is still alive as I record this video. I believe he is 90 years old. And I stumbled across an interview between Harlan Ellison and Robert Silverberg, where Silverberg is lamenting the fact that he was consistently nominated for awards, specifically Hugo Awards, but never seemed to actually come away with the prize. There was even one year, and I forget which books were nominated, it might have been this one, where he had 2 of the nominations for the Hugo Award for Best Novel, and he still didn't win it. So I think in a way it's Silverberg looking back at his own extraordinary ability as a writer and musing over the fact that he used this ability primarily to write science fiction, which he may not feel has given him the recognition and the long-standing success that writing mainstream fiction might have done. But really, when I think about that and how he was such a prolific author, and I'm finding that pretty much everything he's written that I've read so far has been at least good, if not great. And some of his work is still in print in things like the Gollancz SF Masterworks collection, combined with the fact that I can read these books after decades have passed and they're extremely relevant and pressing and don't feel dated in terms of the writing style. I think that Robert Silverberg's recognition as a science fiction grandmaster, whatever that term means, is well deserved and his legacy is enduring. So back to Dying Inside then. The main consideration when determining whether you want to read this book is that there's not necessarily a well-defined plot here. As I mentioned, it is this stream of consciousness. You are flitting around in David's mind between memories at various ages. And there's not necessarily one driving force keeping the book ticking over. You are just jumping back between him writing these papers and into his past. And this can make for, like I say, a bit of a fragmented reading experience. I do think it's really well written. There are moments of absolute brilliance in here. There's one scene in particular where someone is undergoing an acid trip, and rather than taking the acid himself, he uses his telepathic abilities to put himself in the mindset of this person, and he experiences the trip almost like a contact high, and that section is just riveting. And there are a few sections in here like that, with a few of them being sexual in nature, which is something that Robert Silverberg does consistently. He has a history of writing erotic fiction. And again, here you are tiptoeing around some uncomfortable material at times, but I do think it's incredibly well done. So I leave this one feeling like it is an impressive construction. It feels like the definitive telepath novel, and I can't imagine anything really surpassing it. That being said, I would find it difficult to recommend to most readers, particularly if you're someone that is motivated by plot-driven stories. You're not really going to find that here, but if you are looking for a really deep character study that goes to some places that I don't think many science fiction authors have gone or are particularly interested in going, then Dying Inside could be a great shout for you. So they're the two books that I finished recently, pairing up Robert Silverberg and Philip K. Dick. Again, both great reads in different ways, but I think both getting into those kind of internal spaces. I brought a couple of other books with me on this trip. I'm not sure how much time I'm going to be getting to read them, so in the meantime I've scheduled a couple of other videos and I'll get back to some more reviews when I return. Thank you very much for watching, liking and subscribing, and I'll see you on the next one.